तस्मै श्री गुरवे ताथैया ताथैया नाचे भोला, ताथैया ताथैया नाचे भोला, ताथैया ताथैया नाचे भोला, ताथैया ताथैया नाचे भोला। बम बाबा बाजे गान, बम बाबा बाजे गान, धिमी 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 डमरू बाजे, धिमी 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 डमरू बाजे, দুলিছে কপাল মার, তাথৈয়া তাথৈয়া নাচে ভোলা, তাথৈয়া তাথৈয়া নাচে ভোলা। গরজে গঙ্গা জটা মাঝে, উগরে অনল ত্রিশূল রাজে, গরজে গঙ্গা জটা মাঝে, উগরে অনল ত্রিশূল রাজে, ধক 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 মৌলি বন্ধ, 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 জলে শশাঙ্ক ফল, তাথৈয়া তাথৈয়া নাচে ভোলা, তাথৈয়া তাথৈয়া নাচে ভোলা। বম বাবা বাজে গান, বম বাবা বাজে গান, ধিমি 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 ডমরু বাজে, ধিমি 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 ডমরু বাজে, দুলিছে কপাল মাল, তাথৈয়া তাথৈয়া নাচে ভোলা, তাথৈয়া তাথৈয়া নাচে ভোলা। গরজে গঙ্গা ছটা মাঝে, উগরে অনল ত্রিশূল রাজে, গরজে গঙ্গা ছটা মাঝে, উগরে অনল ত্রিশূল রাজে, ধক 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 মৌলি বন্ধ, 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 জলে শশাঙ্ক ফল, তাথৈয়া তাথৈয়া নাচে ভোলা, তাথৈয়া তাথৈয়া নাচে ভোলা, তাথৈয়া তাথৈয়া নাচে ভোলা। ओम श्री राम कृष्ण भगवान की जय।
गंगे अनिंदवा कंदो तोडुं विलासा सदंगयादं पाद विनोदा लिंगेश्वरा निंतार तुने नीदा तिल्ले अंबल नरराजा श्रीमेनादने परमेशा तिल्ले अंबल नरराजा श्रीमेनादने परमेशा अलर्की तांडवा वावा अमे तांडवा अलर्की तांडवा नाद ने परमेशा तिल्ले अंबल नजराजा सिरु में नाद ने परमेशा पलवित नादम कलयेदो पनि उदनुमये तुदि पादम पलवित नादम कलयेदो पनि उदनुमये तुदि पादम हले अलंकार पानीय रानी नेसा हले अलंकार पानीय रानी नेसा मलय वासा मंगा मदियानवा तिल्ले अंबल नजराजा सिरु में नाद ने परमेशा तिल्ले अंबल नजराजा सिरु में नाद ने परमेशा अलर्ति तांडवा वावा अमे तांडवा अलर्ति तांडवा वावा अमे तांडवा तिल्ले अंबल नजराजा सिरु में नाद ने परमेशा तिल्ले अंबल नजराजा सिरु में नाद ने परमेशा 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 ओम श्री राम कृष्ण भगवान की जय।
स्वामी जी की जीवन गाथा आओ सब मिल गाए हम। ये है भारत भाग्य विधाता इनको गले लगाए हम, इनको गले लगाए हम। स्वामी जी की जीवन गाथा आओ सब मिल गाए हम। ये है भारत भाग्य विधाता इनको गले लगाए हम, इनको गले लगाए हम। भटके पथ पर हम सबको जो राह बताने वाले हैं, ये मानव की मानवता को जाग उठाने वाले हैं, जाग उठाने वाले हैं। भटके पथ पर हम सबको जो राह बताने वाले हैं, ये मानव की मानवता को जाग उठाने वाले हैं, जाग उठाने वाले हैं। स्वामी जी की जीवन गाथा आओ सब मिल गाए हम। ये है भारत भाग्य विधाता इनको गले लगाए हम, इनको गले लगाए हम। तेरी गाथा भारतवासी अनुदिन गाते रहते हैं। भक्ति ज्ञान के संगम पर हम तुझ में सब मिल जाते हैं। तेरी गाथा भारतवासी अनुदिन गाते रहते हैं। भक्ति ज्ञान के संगम पर हम तुझ में सब मिल जाते हैं। परमहंस के परम शिष्य तुम, भूपर स्वर्ग बसाए हम। विश्व जगत की माला गुंद कर गुरु के गले चढ़ाए हम, गुरु के गले चढ़ाए हम। स्वामी जी की जीवन गाथा आओ सब मिल गाए हम। ये है भारत भाग्य विधाता, इनको गले लगाए हम, इनको गले लगाए हम। तुम भारत के आन मान हो, नव जीवन ध्रुव तारे हो। तुम्हारी जय जय बनी रहे, अब हम सब पाव पखारे हैं। तुम भारत के आन मान हो, नव जीवन ध्रुव तारे हो। तुम्हारी जय जय बनी रहे, अब हम सब पाव पखारे हैं। जय हो स्वामी जी की जय जय, परमहंस के प्यारे तुम। जय जय बनी रहे भारत मंदिर के अमर सितारे तुम, 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 मंदिर के अमर सितारे तुम। ओम श्री राम कृष्ण भगवान की जय।
There is a very well-known incident in the life of Swami Vivekananda which occurred while he was in the United States. Swamiji was walking in Chicago near a river and witnessed a group of boys standing on a bridge. These boys were attempting to shoot some eggshells that were floating on the river beneath them and weren't very successful. In fact, they missed every eggshell. So they saw Swamiji standing and watching them from a distance and called to him to basically say, "If you think you can do better, come and show us." Swamiji went over to them and, having never handled a gun before, hit every single eggshell. He then explained to the boys that his secret was that when he was handling the gun and aiming at the eggshells, nothing else entered his mind. He was fully consumed with hitting the eggshells. And we call this state focus. According to Swamiji, the secret to life is focus. He says, all knowledge that we have, either of the external or internal world, is obtained through only one method, by concentration of the mind. And we all know, I hope, that once we master the ability to focus, we can master anything. Now, most people today struggle to focus. Many people say they can't focus, or they can only focus at certain times during the day, or they can't focus because of all of the distractions around them, etc. Focusing these days seems to be an immensely difficult thing to do. However, I'd like to point out one logical flaw with this. We only really seem to have a problem focusing when we're working or when we're at school or studying. But when we're on Instagram or YouTube, we don't have any trouble focusing at all. No one is distracted by Instagram when we're watching a YouTube video. And I can guarantee that any Bollywood fan will be able to watch and focus on a Bollywood movie at any time during the day or night and remember every single word in the entire movie, both in Hindi and English. So we all have the ability to concentrate intensely, and we all have photographic memories, except when we really need it. Why? Well, there's actually a biological reason for this. The author Chris Bailey gives a very nice explanation as to why this is the case. He says, contextually, that a key component of focus is attention. And of course, the length of time we can give our attention to a given subject. This is more commonly known as an attention span. Now, worryingly, according to studies conducted by Microsoft, the average human attention span is 8 seconds, after which we must consciously exert effort in order to concentrate. Now, with this in mind, I think we're all aware that we spend a lot of time staring at screens, and this is sometimes necessary to keep in touch with loved ones during COVID and obviously to get work done. But our screens encroach on nearly every aspect of our lives. For example, many of us can and indeed do spend hours on WhatsApp and Facebook and YouTube and maybe these days TikTok. And we do this with ease. It's completely intuitive to switch rapidly between these apps or scroll through feeds for hours on end. And the result is a world of hyperstimulation. Because of the nature of technology and the nature of social media, we don't have to exert much effort to look at a picture on Instagram for 2 seconds or watch a 15-second clip on TikTok. Yet these things stimulate us because they are within our natural attention spans. And we are rapidly and easily able to switch between feeds and apps to stimulate ourselves when we get bored. And when we look up, 2 hours have gone by. Now, this combination of effortless stimulation triggers a secretion of dopamine within the brain. Dopamine is a chemical made in the brain responsible for feelings of pleasure. For example, when we eat our favorite foods or sip our favorite drinks, dopamine is secreted and allows us to enjoy them. But dopamine, in addition to creating the feeling of pleasure, also rewards us for seeking out the object that we enjoy. So in the case of, say, Facebook, for example, the brain rewards us not only while we're actually on Facebook, but also when we seek out Facebook. And it is this reward seeking that causes a problem. And the symptom of this problem is distraction. Now, this seems counterintuitive. How can hyperstimulation cause distraction? Well, firstly, we need to correct a misconception that most people have about the brain. There was a notion a few years ago that stated that we only use about 10% of our brains. This is false. In fact, we all use most of our brains most of the time. And this is important because research has shown that when we're in our deepest states of focus, states like the one that Swami Vivekananda was in when he shot those eggshells, brain activity actually decreases. So for us to have a deep level of concentration, we have to reduce brain stimulation. Or another way to put it, calm the mind. This is a very similar idea to the metaphor that Sri Krishna uses in the Gita to describe the mind. He describes the mind as a chariot that's being drawn by 5 horses, each going in completely different directions. And this is the state in which we find ourselves today. Secondly, the nature of social media is to work within our attention spans to keep us occupied. So in combination with overstimulation, social media affects our attention spans. In fact, many believe that social media diminishes our attention spans. And as a result, we find it very difficult to focus on tasks that require large amounts of time. So, what can we do about this? Well, the most obvious solution would be to reduce the amount of time we spend on our phones. Many psychologists believe that limiting social media usage to about half an hour a day is enough for us to start improving our attention spans. But I know for many people that option is not feasible. So there's really only 2 alternatives. Reduce brain stimulation, another way, and improve our attention spans. An easy way to reduce brain stimulation is meditation or mindfulness. A very common practice of mindfulness today is simply to close our eyes and remain still for a few seconds, just focusing on our breathing. And thereafter, we just have to breathe naturally and watch the thoughts that pop up in our minds and name those thoughts according to whatever they're about, without any judgment or prejudice whatsoever. And in the case of the attention span, the easiest way to improve the attention span is reading, just for about half an hour to an hour a day. When we read, brain stimulation decreases, which is why most of us would rather browse through Facebook than read a book. It forces the brain to pay attention to one thing at a time for a certain period. It doesn't really matter what we read. It could be fiction or non-fiction. And it's no coincidence that a lot of the most successful business people in the world spend a large portion of their leisure time reading. By reading a lot, we avoid overstimulation, so it's easier to focus on the work that we need to do when we need to do it. So I think we all understand why it's challenging to focus today. But by implementing these changes, focusing will become relatively easier than it is now. But the question arises, how do we actually focus on something? We've discussed all the things that get in the way of focusing, but what is the actual process of focusing? Well, focusing can be compared to Swamiji firing a gun at those eggshells. First, he held the gun correctly and firmly. Second, he picked a target, which in this case was the eggshells. Third, he aimed the gun at his chosen target, the eggshells. And finally, he pulled the trigger. So what does that mean? Well, firstly, in this situation, the gun is compared to the mind. So when I speak about gripping the gun correctly, I mean adopting the right attitude. There's no point doing anything and constantly saying to ourselves, I'm going to fail. It's not going to work. There's no way I can do this. If we start any task talking to ourselves that way, there's no way that we can focus on the task at hand because the brain loses interest. It's pointless expending energy on something that's not going to work. So why should the brain pay attention? If we start a task by consciously telling ourselves, either out loud or mentally, I can do this, I can figure this out, I am good enough to complete this, the brain automatically pays attention because there's a chance of success, so it's worth expending energy on the task in front of us. Now, this positivity and energy that we hopefully created when we picked up the rifle will follow through here. The second part of this is pick a target, and I mean that literally. A lot of the time we sit down to work and we aren't clear in our minds what the goal of our work is. I'm not talking about life goals in this case. I'm speaking about almost immediate goals. We can't decide what we need to do in the next hour. So the real challenge here is to make a decision. And the ability to make a decision quickly and correctly comes from self-confidence. If we don't have self-confidence, then we second guess ourselves and we delay making decisions, which wastes energy and time. But the positivity that we create when we simply say, I can do it, creates some self-confidence so that we can make effective decisions about where to place our focus. After we decide what to focus on, we have to aim at it. To do this, we have to be extremely clear about our decisions, and a helpful thing to do is to verbalize the decisions we make quickly and clearly. Some people might want to write down their decisions when they sit down to work and keep it in front of them, so they're always reminded what exactly they need to do right now and what we aim to get out of this work, obviously. When we clarify our goals, it's much easier to recognize when something is a distraction. If it's not the goal that we're aiming at right now, we disregard it. Simple as that. And finally, this is perhaps the most important part of focus, pulling the trigger. Actually doing what we set out to do in a manner that allows us to achieve all the goals we outlined for ourselves earlier. And hopefully we'll find that it's much easier because we are entirely concentrated on just what we need to do right now and nothing else. One of the most important teachings of Sri Krishna in the Bhagavad Gita is that we are not the brain. The brain is a tool that we can use to achieve anything we want. But the only way we can achieve all our goals is to focus the brain in the right direction at the right time. In the words of Swami Vivekananda, concentration is the essence of all knowledge. Nothing can be done without it. 90% of thought force is wasted by the ordinary human being, and therefore he is constantly committing blunders. The trained man or mind never makes a mistake. When the mind is concentrated and turned backward on itself, all within us will be our servants, not our masters. Hari Om, Tat Sat.
Brahma-murari-surajita-lingam Nirmala-bhashita-shobhita-lingam Jana-jadokka-vinashaka-lingam Tat-pranamami Sada-shiva-lingam Tat-pranamami Sada-shiva-lingam Deva-muni Pravarachita-lingam Kamadaham Karunakara-lingam Ravana-darpa-vinashaka-lingam Tat-pranamami Sada-shiva-lingam Tat-pranamami Sada-shiva-lingam Sarva-sugandhi-sulepita-lingam Bodhi-vivardhana-dharana-lingam Seta-sura-sura-vandita-lingam Tat-pranamami Sada शिवलिङ्गं कुङ्कुमचन्दनलेपितलिङ्गं पङ्कजहार सुशोभितलिङ्गं सञ्चितपापविनाशनलिङ्गं तत्प्रणमामि सदा शिवलिङ्गं तत्प्रणमामि सदा शिवलिङ्गं देवगणार्चितसेवितलिङ्गं भावे भक्तिभिरेव च लिङ्गं दिनकरकोटिप्रभाकरलिङ्गं तत्प्रणमामि सदा शिवलिङ्गं तत्प्रणमामि सदा शिवलिङ्गम् अष्टदलोपरिवेशितलिङ्गं सर्वसमोद्भवकारणलिङ्गम् अष्टदरिद्रविनाशितलिङ्गं तत्प्रणमामि सदा शिवलिङ्गं तत्प्रणमामि सदा शिवलिङ्गं सुरगुरुसुरवरपूजितलिङ्गं सुरवनपुष्पसदार्चितलिङ्गं परात्परं परमात्मकलिङ्गं तत्प्रणमामि सदा शिवलिङ्गं तत्प्रणमामि सदा शिवलिङ्गम् लिङ्गास्तकमिदं पुण्यं यः पठे शिवसन्निधौ शिवलोकमवाप्नोति शिवेन सह मोदते शिवेन सह मोदते ॐ श्रीराम कृष्ण भगवान् की जय।
Om Namo Narayanaya, dear sisters and brothers. Let us sit calmly and feel the presence of God in our hearts. Swami Vivekananda is the embodiment of compassion. He was determined to do good and lived to uplift suffering humanity. Through his deep meditation, he showed us the way to inner peace and light. May Swamiji's life inspire us to be courageous and good. May he fill us with peace and inner strength to face our challenges. Om Shanti, Shanti, Shanti.
ॐ सर्वेषां स्वस्तिर्भवतु सर्वेषां शान्तिर्भवतु सर्वेषां पूर्णं भवतु सर्वेषां मङ्गलं भवतु सर्वे भवन्तु सुखिनः सर्वे सन्तु निरामयाः सर्वे भद्राणि पश्यन्तु मा कश्चित् दुःखभाग् भवेत् ॐ पूर्णमदः पूर्णमिदं पूर्णात् पूर्णमुदच्यते पूर्णस्य पूर्णमादाय पूर्णमेवावशिष्यते ॐ शान्ति महाराज की जय, महामाई की जय, स्वामी जी महाराज की जय, गंगा मात की जय, महावीर स्वामी जी की जय, सर्व ऋषि मुनीन की जय, पार्वती पतये हर हर महा